2016 against human trafficking, sir, in which I have said recently, sir, has to be taken very seriously, because the penalties for breach of that domestic legislation are very harsh. I don't think many Barbadians realize the severity of the penalties to be imposed on someone who is found guilty of human trafficking or any kind of involvement in human trafficking. Most of the clauses, the penalties, are for $1 million or 25 years in prison. And in fact, only one such clause where, in fact, you take the passport of someone who has been brought in for human trafficking. That penalty is a bit lesser, but still very harsh, $500,000 or 20 years in prison, or both. So this is a serious offence, and this Parliament is, of course, being asked to maintain that kind of severity. There is a change, sir, being proposed on the issue of convictions for drugs, sir. And again, in conformity with recent trends, sir, where under the present law you could prevent someone who has been convicted of one offence only for possession of cannabis, and which is less than trafficable quantity, sir. In other words, personal use, for instance, from coming in, where their imprisonment was of 1 year or longer, sir. And the proposal, the proposed amendment, sir, will move that 1 year to 5 years, sir. And again, as I said, sir, that is, being in conformity with how we're moving in the world, sir. But clearly, we will maintain the prohibition against someone who has been found guilty of trafficking in terms of drugs, sir. And again, sir, this has to be because of the national security of our country. We don't need people in here with historical record for trafficking in drugs of whatever kind. And we maintain, therefore, prohibition against such persons. We also maintain the prohibition, sir, against persons who have been advocates of terrorism or treason, overthrowing governments by force, violence, abolition of organized government, assassination of persons as well who are affiliated or members of any group that teaches or entertains any doctrine or practice in furtherance of such causes. So we don't need them here. Our national security has to be protected by as great an effort as we can. And again, sir, needless to say, the Shanique Myrie case speaks about that too. The ability of member countries of CARICOM, signatories to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, such as Barbados, is to prevent CARICOM nationals even from entering Barbados who are a threat to our national security. And obviously, sir, we still maintain persons against whom deportation orders have been previously made. There is, of course, provision, though, in terms of ministerial discretion for lifting deportation orders, and these are done, sir, from time to time based on reasonable grounds, and therefore this is not a carte blanche. As I said, sir, in the debate last Friday, it is something that we are looking at to put on a firmer footing so that there is transparency and so that the criteria could be known to all and sundry. And of course, persons who are seeking to enter Barbados without a passport will continue to be prohibited. Passport, of course, is supreme, and in terms of ability to identify yourself and to speak towards what nationality you are, etc. So clearly, it goes without saying that you cannot prevent a Barbadian or citizen or permanent resident from entering the country, and just to make that clear. So there are the proposed amendments to the further amendments to the Immigration Act, sir, continuing from last week, Friday's passage, at least through this lower house of the bill. And as I said, sir, this should not cause any controversy. Some of the provisions should never have been in the Act, in my submission in the first place, because they speak towards discrimination of a vital sector of mankind, so people with disabilities, who in fact make up an estimated 5% of the population of Barbados, and a higher percentage in terms of the world, and others that are just practical, sir, in terms of how, you know, the regimes have developed, legal regimes, but still maintaining, sir, the basic principles and philosophies which are required to maintain the national security, the health security, and the of our country, as well as to ensure that an individual who comes in does not become a charge on our state funds. I'm obliged to you, sir. Oh, so I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Honourable Member for St. Michael West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a few comments, perhaps, on this matter, as the process of amending the legislation, the Immigration Department and its operations and concern started here in debate on Friday. And I think, Mr. Speaker, this is more than simply an administrative matter that we're dealing with. It's more than simply updating the legislative architecture around certain administrative issues. I think these are serious matters of security and bear much significance to economy as well. And it is from that perspective, perhaps, or in that context, I would like to set these few comments. Immigration Department in Barbados is a very important unit in our border enforcement architecture, and as such, therefore, contributes significantly to the security of Barbados. And I think if you look beyond that and you treat to the movement of people, whether for legitimate or illegitimate purposes, you find that that movement has serious implications for the economy, both in terms of what the movement might contribute to the growth of the economy, and also what the movement might represent to us in terms of economic costs. So it is from the perspective of security and economy that I would want to just make these few remarks. The Caribbean community has a strategic plan around matters such as this. It's a strategic plan 2015 to 2019, which means, in fact, that Barbados still very much operates within the context of that CARICOM strategic plan 2015-2019. And therefore, this has to be considered in that context, the context of that strategic 2015 to 2019 plan, which treats to or speaks to strengthening regional security systems. And I think we can pretty much infer readily from what the Honourable Member for St. James North said, partly in his comments, is that these amendments are intended in part to treat to this, especially when you start to talk in terms of things like terrorism and acts of violence against the government of the day or against the interests of the Barbados jurisdiction. But the objectives of that strategic plan include as well strengthening our borders. In the Caribbean, we're all subject to that vulnerability. We have exposed coastline. We have very porous borders. The Coast Guard of Barbados, Customs of Barbados, Immigration of Barbados are all therefore involved strategically in a very significant task of defending our interests in the context of being a space with very porous borders. The strategic plan also has an objective of deepening crime prevention initiatives across the Caribbean, much of which we would have heard about last week with reference to the Advanced Passenger Information Service. And I think, again, we are being advised and informed that this is in the thinking of the Honourable Minister when he brings these amendments here, that to the extent that we can reinforce our defenses, to the extent that we can put in place more robust crime prevention architectural planks or components to what we have, then we are very much contributing beyond the security of Barbados to the security of the Caribbean in an effort on a regional basis to prevent and to retard the advance of crime across the region. We have to, and this is part of the objective of the strategic plan, as I have discovered, enhance our maritime and airspace awareness, an advanced passenger system, and the fact that we're making it clear that Barbados wants to welcome all and sundry who are possessed of good intentions, who are on legitimate business, but at the same time want clearly to discourage and deter those who might otherwise be motivated. Then we have to enhance the awareness around our maritime space as well as our airspace. And therefore, I commend the Honourable Minister for moving to bring these measures here for our consideration. And of course, I would want to support them. If we look at the business of the threats which we face, there are, as I understand it, 3 levels of threat, or those threats are characterized at 3 levels, and so defined. And the most potent of which is said to be trafficking in drugs and guns. Now, that's a big problem for this country at this stage. And I have spoken elsewhere about that. I will speak to that repeatedly, because we do have a problem with the movement of firearms, illegally so, into this country. And I do not think that we have sufficiently been effective in the counter of that movement, in the investigation of the sources of these firearms, and in the prosecution of those who are found guilty to be perpetrators in this regard. And I have said repeatedly, a guy in Bayville shoots a guy in Four Roads, and we will bury the guy in Four Roads, and we will jail the guy from Bayville. But nobody will ask whither has the gun come. And And I think it is insufficient that we continue that we have that sort of situation persisting in Barbados, because these arms must be coming, illegal arms must be coming from somewhere, being facilitated by some medium or some source. And I really think that we have long passed the day when the boys from Four Road must be buried, and the boys from Bayville must be imprisoned, and those who put the guns on the ground here and in their hands are not investigated and prosecuted. Mr. Speaker, I want you to have the privilege of defending in court for a handsome sum some of the bigwigs in the country who contribute to that, whether they're found in business circles of the private sector, whether or not they're found at the highest levels of the public service, whether they're found among the political class, whether they come from the priestly order. It does not matter, Mr. Speaker. I want to know that you are the beneficiary of a few handsome sums for having to defend them unsuccessfully in court because of their misdeeds that help to corrupt the world of our young people.
Honourable member was hearing you correct with a word that you use, unsuccessfully. Just wanted to be assured that I have heard you.
You heard me correctly, Mr. Speaker.
Just wanted.
You heard me correctly, Mr. Speaker, and that's no reflection on your ability. That's more reflection on my desire to see them locked up.
Among other people.
Yes, that's all there is, Mr. Speaker. I would want for you to benefit from the handsome sums, but I would want for them to be deprived of their freedom if in fact they are guilty of perpetrating this kind of violence against our world here in this country and against the interests of our young people. So what the Honourable Minister is bringing to us today is not a simple matter. It may seem so because it is simply worded and simply put by him. But we're dealing with issues of security, and we're dealing with issues of economy. So in characterizing and defining the risk which we face in this country, Mr. Speaker, cybercrime, trafficking in drugs, organized crime, cybercrime, financial crime, and corruption, with which we're all familiar, are listed as the Category 1 threat facing us. Now, we're all experts now at identifying and defining corruption. I'm sure none here is an expert in the practice of corruption, but certainly we are all schooled now as to what corruption is, how it looks, and where it leaves a country. And Mr. Speaker, that is one of the components which constitute that Category 1 risk to this country. Corruption, of course, crosses borders as well, comes from the outside and it visits our shores. Second level of threat, and the Honourable Member from St. James North, Honourable Minister, my friend, dealt with this, and it has to do with human trafficking. It's a serious, serious thing, human trafficking. And I'll speak a bit more about that, but that is a second level of the threat which we face. Now, human trafficking, we tend to think conduces or contributes to a certain type of activity. The truth is, human trafficking could be a medium whereby we have persons bent on violence find a presence on our shores. But human trafficking is listed as categorized as number 2 among those threats which immediately face us. And then, of course, attacks on our critical infrastructure, usually the work of terrorists. But I have to say to you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to commend the Honourable Minister for Energy and Water Resources for his very strong statement recently relative to any move on the part of any entity in Barbados to repossess or confiscate or dismantle water tanks that provide provide a critical and essential commodity and resource. Life, in terms of material resources, depends more so on water. In terms of material resources, depends more so on water than anything else. And I commend the Honourable Minister for his very strong statement. And the government, especially the government with these numbers, must not stand for the type of nonsense that relegates our people, whether from urban Barbados, rural St. Joseph, St. John, or St. Andrew, to the status of pawns in a game of greed. And I commend the Honourable Minister for a very strong statement and his reaction. And as I was reflecting, preparing to make this presentation in Parliament, and I got to realize that among those threats against which we must guard and from which we are faced, one of them is attacks on critical infrastructure. And I thought that that action constituted very much that. That was an attack on critical infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, which is not at all to be tolerated. I say that without excuse or apology. There are those who would say, what a stupid fellow. He stands in the position of opposition. He should be very much taking the side and embracing the interests of those who are not likely to support the government in the wake of this action. But I believe the interests of Barbadians come first, Mr. Speaker. And I believe that when the government does a right thing, it is to be lauded. When it does a not so right thing, it is to be reminded. And I so choose to do here today. And of course, our tourism-related facilities, just as it has happened in many places and some not too far away from us, become targets of illegal, violent activity. And therefore, immigration regulations are significantly relevant to the prevention of that type of thing. Mr. Speaker, in a real sense, when we look at some of the issues being addressed in the bill and in the minister's presentation, we realize we're dealing with organized crime in terms of the movement of people, in terms of human trafficking. We're dealing with what is called syndicated organized crime. To quote, girls and women and men are recruited every year, transported, marketed, and purchased by members of transnational syndicates. Barbados is not immune to this type of activity. This activity is very much part and parcel of the experience, the reality in the Caribbean now. It perhaps takes place to a larger extent on other shores not too far from us. But we're a Caribbean people. We're one people despite our diversity. And Mr. Speaker, we are in the mix of things with the rest of our neighbors, some of whom speak a slightly different language from the one which we speak. But this trafficking in human flesh is a very serious thing. Mr. Speaker, that should be abhorrent to all of us. We have all come out of an experience of slavery. Our foreparents were trafficked and brought across the Atlantic to these shores. We know of the evil that the transatlantic slave trade and the practice, the institutionalized practice of slavery in the Caribbean is all about. And therefore, any trafficking in human persons should be abhorrent to us. I did a check to see the extent to which human trafficking is a problem in our part of the world. And I discovered from the ILO information documents, up to about a few years ago, it was estimated that there were about 21 million people who were victims of forced labor in the world. 21 million people who were victims of forced labor across the world. And of these, about 2 million were found to be in Latin America and the Caribbean. So this is not a problem removed from us. This is a problem which is part of our reality. And that's why I said, and the measures that the Honourable Member, my friend from St. James North, The measures he has brought are not simply administrative, not simply and in an insignificant fashion adding to the legislative architecture built to ensure our protection, our security, and to also protect our economic interests. These are important. According to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, the share of victims trafficked for forced labor outside of prostitution in Latin America and the Caribbean is 44%, and that is higher than in Europe and in Central Asia. So this business of trafficking in human flesh is a serious thing in our part of the world. The two countries in the Caribbean, more notably identified with this type of activity, would be Haiti, of course, and the Dominican Republic. But it is a concern for all of us to varying extents. People of Haiti, the people of the Dominican Republic are part of our region, our CARICOM and our CARIFORUM region, and therefore our neighbors and brothers and sisters. I want to make the point as well, Mr. Speaker, that there are systemic issues of poverty which must be addressed. I've made reference to this before. That's why I say we treat into matters of economy and matters of security and matters of economy. The systemic issues relative to poverty must be addressed. We can bring these measures here to stop the movement of certain people, the trafficking in the movement of certain people. And notwithstanding the fact that when people travel, sometimes legitimately, sometimes illegitimately, there is a benefit of remittances back to home, wherever home is, and therefore benefit to some economy. We've got to realize that the poverty reality which we face, facilitates, conduces to employment exploitation. And employment exploitation is a big thing in Barbados, even without reference to any business of human trafficking. But when we get into human trafficking, we're dealing with a different dimension, and the issue of poverty feeds that. So we have to treat to the matter of employment exploitation. Mr. Speaker, I have this notion, I've said it before, in the culture of Barbados, and it is evident to all of us, and some of us admittedly are the products of that. They're economic dependent relationships. People are thrown together in evidently romantic relationships and social interchanges, Mr. Speaker, which are based on economic dependency. Usually, it is a woman who must depend upon a man for the support of her 2 or 3 children who may have 2 or 3 fathers. And the employment situation relative to women is something that we have to look at in Barbados, but I'm speaking in that wider frame today. Economic dependent relationships are a reality. Where people have a degree of economic dependence, Mr. Speaker, they become vulnerable to those who are involved in this business of trading and trafficking. Sexual harassment and exploitation is very much a part of that. We see the mention of Haiti, we see the mention of Dominican Republic. We know the ethnic groups that we find around here who are made subject to this type of practice. We can't deny that this thing is happening. I think incidents of recent weeks which have come to public media attention are just reminders of this is a reality that is lived in Barbados every day. And it's not only in Bridgetown, in certain parts of the Bridgetown geography, but it is all across Barbados. And this matter of sexual harassment and sexual exploitation in illegitimate context as well as legitimate context, Mr. Speaker, because as a pastor, I confront the situation from time to time where females come for counsel who find themselves the oft prey of vulturous, if that's a word, Mr. Speaker, you're better at these things than I am, employers and bosses who want to have their way with them. And all of this is part of the reality that feeds the situation where women especially are vulnerable in situations and where you have this exploitation of their plight for material gain, and the immigration department gets caught up in some of these. The business of holding people's passports, and I believe, Mr. Speaker, there must be somewhere, I don't like all the calls for lock up people, but there must be somewhere you can deal with a fella that will hold a fella's passport or hold a lady's passport, and therefore try to force them into situations to which they may not be amenable. And this, I know from my experience with immigration, it is an issue. People hold on to people's passports, and that ought not to be the case. And I really believe that a firm hand is needed with respect to that particular one, Mr. Speaker. Now, as with drugs, we are not merely a transit point in Barbados anymore. I think that herein lies the problem. We were at some stage with reference to drugs just a transit point, the movement of drugs between South America and North America and sometimes Europe. We're now becoming a center for consumption, and we're now becoming a center for cultivation. And with all due respect to our colleagues from the east of this country, we do recognize that that is becoming part of the reality with which we have to deal. So we're not only now a transit point, we're now a target market. And if we are now a target market, we would expect that there will be those who will be seeking to intrude upon our presence and trespass across our borders. And therefore, the measures the Honourable Member would have brought here today is to be understood again in that particular context. I must make the point, I am from St. Michael. I do represent an urban constituency. It's called St. Michael West, for those who may not know. I do represent an urban constituency called St. Michael West. And the reality I see there, I know, is a reality replicated in other parts of urban Barbados and possibly also in rural Barbados. You are familiar with it, Mr. Speaker, because you represent a neighboring constituency, St. Michael Central, and you are there with great frequency and your presence very prominent. So you know entirely what is going on the ground. You know what the reality is there, Mr. Speaker. And you see the living conditions that some people must abide. I think the Honourable Member for St. Michael South mentioned this last week in his contribution to that particular debate. People are living in horrific conditions. People are living in substandard, subhuman conditions. And they are unscrupulous landlords. I call them slumlords, Mr. Speaker, who have contributed to the development of slum enclaves in Barbados, if I might use that term. And they're exploiting people who have no place to live. They've come into this country. They're here perhaps illegally. They're here about illegal business, even if they are here legally. And they must abide these, this substandard level of housing, if you call it that, accommodation, which contributes to environmental risk, health risks, community scarring, and many of our urban communities today are becoming scarred for various reasons. But one of the reasons is the buildup of these slum estates almost in St. Michael, Mr. Deputy, Mr. Speaker. You know what I'm talking about. So when I say that the measure brought here is not something slight, the measures brought here I see in a context where we must address all of these significant matters that impact upon economy as well as security. Now, Mr. Speaker, and I know you will join me in this, and I must say this before I sit down, I don't subscribe to this notion of sex workers. I hear that bandied about. I am glad it did not escape the lips of the Honourable Member for St. James North. But I don't believe in this business of sex workers. What in the world is that? If you're talking prostitution, I understand you. If you're talking trading in human flesh, I understand you. But I don't subscribe to this notion of sex workers. It is indeed a trade in human flesh. It is the highest form of attack on an exploitation of human dignity. And to the extent that the Honourable Member intends not to allow people known to be in the business of that quote-unquote sex trade, I support him fully in this attempt to bring this legislation to this business of sex worker, a euphemistic term that we have contrived in order to bring dignity to a very undignifying lifestyle. I think we must do with haste something to remove from our vocabulary. Prostitution has become necessary for some people, but it is not, in my view, to be encouraged. That people should think this is the best I can do, or this is the best situation which I might arrive. And I don't think that any government should settle for the view, all right, if that's where they are, we can do nothing for them. Let's just provide a safe and secure environment so they may play their trade. I'm not saying this is what this government has said. I'm simply saying I hope that that is not the view held over there. And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, you are together with me on that. Mr. Speaker, do you know that the economic cost of terrorism, and this is 2014, economic cost of terrorism reached $106 billion US in 2014? Do you know how many poor people that could have fed? Do you know how many prostitutes that could get off the streets? Do you know how many people involved at the end of the line in the drug trade that can get out of that culture? $106 billion US. This is big business. It's not only big business to those who are involved in it, but it is big business in terms of the big costs that is laid at the doorstep of small countries and small economies like ours. Because if there's a threat to terrorism, then we must try our best to counter that threat by putting in place systems, by employing the use of the technologies, by employing the relevant and requisite skills, so that we can counter that, putting in place the necessary architecture, that we can do that. So it's a cost to small states like us. So when the cost is all told, in 2014, $106 billion US, that comes out of a study done by university in the United States, I think the University of Maryland. In 2014 as well, Mr. Speaker, in Latin America, forced labor accrued a financial value of $12 billion US out of a global financial value of $150 billion US. A lot of money being spent, a lot of money revolving around this, so a lot of people will be attracted to it. A lot of people would give themselves to that because for them it might be easier than doing what we call legitimate, everyday, hard, honest work. And so, Mr. Speaker, because that is a reality, we have to counter that, and we have to brace ourselves against it, and we have to provide for a situation where our country is not swamped by those who are here for illegitimate purposes and those who will do us harm in terms of our security, or those who will bring negative pressure and stress further so on our already stressed economy. And so in that context, I give my fullest support to my friend from St. James North.
Honourable Member for St. James North.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first wish to, express my gratitude to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for his expression of support to the Government of Barbados and to the Ministry of Home Affairs and all its departments on this particular amendment to the Immigration Act. He has shown maturity here in recognizing what is our intention in this bill, to clearly rid ourselves of those aspects of the Act's prohibition against entry into Barbados, of those that are most offensive to our way of life and to humankind as we know it, and the evolution of thought that people with disabilities and have as much worth, even more, I would wish to say, than those without ostensible disabilities. But he has seen, and this is certainly the government's every intention, to maintain our border security, to buttress in any way the defense of this country, both from any threats outside and threats within. And therefore we all have to give the police force, defense force, immigration, customs, the support that is required, but reinforce our view every time that, as I certainly have done recently, sir, that we have no room for any corrupt practices involved in the governance of our country at any level of the aspects of society, and therefore we will certainly not tolerate any corruption or corrupt practices or briberies by any border security officers or any officers involved in securing the physical being of our citizens within Barbados. And certainly we will act against such corruption and corrupt practices when they reveal themselves with evidence and with reasonableness. But certainly, sir, the issue of removing prohibition, don't mind whether it was enforced or not, sir, it was still there and therefore capable of being enforced. Removing the prohibition against people with visual disabilities and physical and mental disabilities from entering Barbados now opens up a greater avenue for tourism from people with disabilities, sir. We had moved a few years ago to making Barbados more friendly towards people with disabilities. We have to continue the process. I know that the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, in her capacity as Minister of People Empowerment in charge, with advancing the cause for people with disabilities, in her caring nature, will see that this policy is advanced even further in terms of making Barbados more friendly towards people with disabilities, both in terms of the natural and built structures of Barbados. And as I said, sir, there are people with disabilities with great wealth, and we look to welcome them as tourists even more onto the shores of Barbados for conferences, in groups, whether on cruises. A lot of people with disabilities from North America, Canada, Europe travel on cruises, and I'm sure that my colleague and neighbouring Member of Parliament, the Honourable Member for St. James Central, Minister of Tourism, will welcome them and will do all in his capacity and in his ministry's ability to encourage people with disabilities from coming, because I have no doubt, sir, that there are some people with disabilities, they surf the net just like everybody else, probably more so than others, and they would have seen this prohibition in Barbados immigration law and they would have said, we ain't going there. I mean, we're not going to that kind of country. And therefore we look forward and we hope with welcome arms, and we encourage people who are now removed from this prohibition, you know, in terms of our immigration laws for the last 40-odd years, to come to Barbados and to avail themselves of the benefit of our beautiful country, sir. With these words, sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
Questions that this bill be read a third time. Second time you said? Or third? He said second. Third one? No, he said second. He said one. Second time, not third. Right? Second time. Say third.
Second time?
Yes, not third.
The second time, sir.
Right. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Committee.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Your Honour now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee to further consider this bill.
Question is that the Speaker do leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Person, I move that clause 1 stand part.
I second that.
Question is that clause 1 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Chairperson, I move that clause 2 stand part.
I second that.
Question is that clause 2 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Chairperson, I move that clause 3 stand part.
I second that.
Question is that clause 3 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Madam Chairperson, I move that clause 4 stand part.
I second.
Question is that clause 4 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Chairperson, I move that clause 5 stand part.
I second.
Question is that clause 5 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
That's it. Chairperson, I beg to move that you do now report to the House, that you do now report to His Honour, the Speaker, the passing of one bill in committee.
Question is that I now report to the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman of committee has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
Second.
Question is that this bill be read a third time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Immigration Amendment Number 2 Act 2018.
Second.
Question is that this bill be now passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Okay. Recommittal.
I gotta say something.
I sign off.
Announcements by your Honourable Committee.
Message from the Honourable the House of Assembly to the Honourable the Senate. The Honourable the House of Assembly has the honour to inform the Honourable the Senate that on the 18th day of December 2018, the Honourable the House of Assembly committed the following bill: Public Finance Management Bill 2018, to a joint select committee of the two houses comprising 7 members of the Honourable the House of Assembly and 4 members of the Honourable the Senate, and has approved the following terms of reference for the committee. Terms of reference: 1, to inquire into and determine whether the bill has drafted effectively fulfills the express objects of improving the management of public finance in Barbados. 2, to examine whether the bill has drafted will, upon effective implementation, contribute to an ethos of compliance with the financial rules in government affairs, thereby promoting transparency and accountability. And 3, to make recommended changes, if deemed necessary, to the bill as drafted for further consideration by the Chief Parliamentary Council. The House of Assembly has appointed the following members to the Joint Select Committee: Honourable Dale D. Marshall, QC, LLB, Honours LEC, Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs; Honourable Wilfred A. Abrahams, LLB, Minister of Energy and Water Resources; Honourable Colin E. Jordan, BSc Honours, Minister of Labour and Social Partnership Relations; Honourable Kurt D. M. Humphrey, BSc MSc MPA, Minister of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy; Honourable Ryan R. Strawn, BSc MSc, Minister in the Ministry of Finance; Mr. Ralph Earthorne, QC, LLB, LEC, Diploma Theology; Bishop Joe S. Adley, JP, BA, BSc, PGD, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move that the House be suspended until 4 p.m. today.
Beg to second that, sir.
Question is that this Honourable Chamber be suspended until 4 p.m.
Joe?
All those honourable members in favour, please say
Trying to
aye.
get close to you.
Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This Honourable Chamber is suspended until 4 p.m.